The sterile, jasmine-scented air of the Swedish First Hill maternity wing was supposed to be a minor inconvenience. Charles Burden, CEO of Burden Global Properties, checked his Audemars Piguet. Beside him, Sienna Vance, all of 24, and smelling of Tom Ford's Lost Cherry, pouted for a selfie. "Charles, I really think it's an ulcer. It burns." Charles just grunted, firing off an email. Then, a commotion. A gurney slammed through the double doors. Urgent voices. "Vitals crashing. PPCM flare-up. Get her to L&D 5. Stat." Charles glanced up, annoyed, and his world stopped. Sweat-soaked, pale, and gripping her swollen belly was Evelyn, his ex-wife. The polished marble floor of the lobby suddenly felt like quicksand. Charles Burden's phone, a $3,000 slab of titanium and glass, slipped from his numb fingers. It hit the plush carpet of the executive waiting lounge with a dull, soundless thud. Evelyn, it wasn't just seeing her. It was the context. The gurney. The sterile white blanket stretched taut over a pregnancy so advanced it looked painful. The paramedic barking medical jargon he didn't understand. PPCM flare-up. Stat. Vitals. Charles, what's wrong with you? You look like you're about to be sick." Sienna's voice, usually a sharp, confident staccato, now sounded like a mosquito whining in his ear. He couldn't turn his head. He couldn't breathe. His gaze was locked on the automatic doors that had swished shut behind the gurney, a final, definitive barrier. I thought I saw someone," he managed to say. The words felt like gravel in his mouth. "Someone? Who?" Sienna stood up, adjusting the strap of her Gucci Dionysus bag. Her manufactured concern was already dissolving into impatience. "You're white as a sheet. You're scaring me more than this stupid stomachache." Pregnant. Evelyn was pregnant. The math began, a frantic, horrifying calculation in his head. Their divorce had been finalized 8 months ago. 8 months. But the separation, the bitter, agonizing final weeks in their shared Queen Anne mansion. When was the last time? He'd been emotionally checked out for a year, but the physical separation was much more recent. He remembered a night of whiskey and regret. One last, desperate attempt to feel something other than the suffocating void their marriage had become. It was just before he'd moved into the downtown penthouse. "Oh God, Charles, I'm serious," Sienna snapped, her voice rising. "My appointment is in 5 minutes. Are you coming in, or are you just going to sit there looking like a dead person?" He finally turned to look at her. Sienna Vance. She was everything he'd told himself he deserved. Young, ambitious, uncomplicated. Her entire life was a curated Instagram feed. Her nagging stomachache was, he knew, almost certainly just anxiety from a weekend of champagne and networking. She was a status symbol, the perfect accessory to his billion-dollar real estate empire. And Evelyn had been the foundation. He'd spent the last year convincing himself that the foundation was cracked. He'd told his friends, his board, himself, that Evelyn had let herself go, that she'd gotten too comfortable. She, who had hosted flawless fundraisers, who had proofread his prospectuses until 3 a.m., who had held his hand when his first big Seattle development almost went bankrupt. He had reframed her stability as stagnation, her loyalty as lack of ambition. She just stopped trying. He'd confided to a colleague over a $500 stake at Canlis. "A man in my position needs a partner, not an anchor." Now the image of her on that gurney, vulnerable, in agony, but fighting, shattered that carefully constructed narrative. That wasn't a woman who had stopped trying. That was a woman fighting for her life, and perhaps the life of his child. "I can't," he said, his voice hollow. "You can't what? Can't come in? Charles, you promised. You said you'd hold my hand if they wanted to do a— I can't go in, Sienna. He stood up, his legs shaking. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, who stared down city councils, who built skyscrapers that redefined the Seattle skyline. And he was terrified. I have to make a call. You go. I'll wait. You'll wait, like a chauffeur. Her offense was immediate. This was not part of their brand. Just go, Sienna. Please. The urgency in his voice, a raw panic he never exposed, finally silenced her. She narrowed her eyes, a flicker of genuine suspicion crossing her face. Who was that, Charles? Nobody, he lied, turning away. Just a ghost. Sienna scoffed. Fine, whatever. Don't be surprised if I call an Uber. She swept off toward the specialist's office, her anger radiating from the click-clack of her Louboutin heels. Charles didn't watch her go. He was already moving, walking not toward the exit, but toward the maternity ward elevator. His mind was a hurricane of questions. How? Why didn't she tell me? PPCM? What is PPCM? Guilt, cold and sharp, pierced the armor of his arrogance. He hadn't just left his wife. He had abandoned a pregnant, sick woman. He had left her to face this, whatever this was, completely and utterly alone. The woody, confident scent of his cologne suddenly mixed with the smell of antiseptic. And for the first time in his life, Charles Burden felt the suffocating stench of his own failure. The elevator doors opened onto the labor and delivery floor, and Charles was hit with a wall of quiet tension. It was a different world from the polished, hotel-like lobby. Here, the lighting was softer, the air heavier, punctuated by the faint, rhythmic beeping of fetal heart monitors from behind closed doors. Nurses moved with a brisk, silent purpose that unnerved him. He felt entirely out of place in his bespoke Brioni suit. His reflection in a darkened window showed a man who looked haunted, his usual confident, commanding expression replaced by a mask of raw panic. He approached the central nurses' station, a large semicircle of desks littered with charts and computers. A nurse with kind, tired eyes looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm looking for a patient," Charles said, his voice tight. "She was just brought in. An emergency. Her name is Evelyn. Evelyn Kirby." He'd almost said Evelyn Burden. The divorce papers had insisted she revert to her maiden name. At the time, it had felt like a clean, necessary cut. Now it felt like another amputation. The nurse typed the name into the system. Her expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, sir. We have no patient by that name currently checked in." "No, that's impossible. I just saw her. She was on a gurney. They said, PPCM? Does that mean anything?" The nurse's eyes sharpened. "Sir, even if she were here, I couldn't give you any information unless you're on her approved list. HIPAA regulations. What was he? "I'm the father of her child." The words tasted foreign, like a language he hadn't spoken in years. "Unless you are her legal spouse or designated medical proxy, I can't help you." The professional wall was up. It was polite, but absolute. "But I was her spouse," he protested, his voice rising, drawing a glance from another nurse. "We were married. This is my baby." The nurse gave him a look steeped in 1,000 similar dramas. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wait in the designated family lounge. If the patient wishes to see you, she will have someone contact you." Defeated, Charles retreated. He stalked down the hallway and found the family lounge, a small room with beige walls, uncomfortable chairs, and a television playing a home renovation show on mute. He was alone. The silence was deafening, filled only by the frantic monologue in his own head. He'd left Evelyn. The narrative he'd spun for himself and the world was one of mutual drifting. an amicable split. We just want different things. It was a lie. He had wanted different things. He'd wanted the thrill of the new, the validation of a younger woman, the freedom from a marriage that had begun to feel like a comfortable, well-worn sweater when he wanted a suit of armor. He remembered the day he'd told her. They were in the kitchen of their Queen Anne home, a sprawling craftsman he'd just had featured in Architectural Digest. Evelyn was arranging flowers from their garden. "I'm not happy, Evie," he'd said, the words clinically detached. She'd frozen, a yellow rose held aloft. "What do you mean you're not happy? We just closed the Rainier Square deal. You're on top of the world. This isn't about work. It's about us. It's stale, don't you think? We're in a routine. We eat at the same 3 restaurants. You wear the same perfume. We haven't connected in months." She had looked at him, her eyes, usually so warm, turning cold with a comprehension that terrified him. "I've been trying to connect, Charles. You're the one who's been at client dinners until 2 a.m. You're the one who's been on your phone through every meal. I'm here, Charles. Where the hell have you been?" He'd waved it all away. "This is what I'm talking about. Blame, resentment. I'm done. I want a divorce." He'd expected tears. He'd expected begging. He had not expected the quiet, terrifying dignity she'd shown. She'd simply placed the rose in the vase, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "If that's what you want, Charles, then you should call your lawyer. But know this, you are making the biggest mistake of your life. And you are a fool." He'd dismissed it as the predictable anger of a woman scorned. Now, sitting in this sterile waiting room, her words echoed with the force of a prophecy. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking, and dialed his lawyer. Not his divorce lawyer, his corporate lawyer, a shark named Marcus Thorne. "Charles, this is a surprise. I thought you were in the middle of the Mercer deal. Marcus, I'm at Swedish First Hill. Evelyn's here." There was a beat of silence. "Is she all right?" "She's pregnant, Marcus. She's in labor, an emergency, and I think it's mine." Another, longer silence. Marcus was processing, not emotionally, but legally. "Charles, do you know it's yours? The timing. It's possible. It's more than possible. What does this mean?" "It means," Marcus said, his voice devoid of all warmth, "that your clean break just got monumentally messy. The divorce decree is final. Assets are divided. But paternity is a whole different battlefield. If that child is yours, he or she is your legal heir. Period. It impacts your estate, your holdings, everything. Your prenup with Evelyn is void as it pertains to child support. And given your income, that support will be astronomical, not to mention your current situation." He meant Sienna. He meant the board. A high-profile paternity scandal was the last thing Burden Global Properties needed. "What do I do?" Charles whispered. "First, you say nothing. You admit nothing. You wait for a paternity test. You do not sign anything. You do not offer anything. You are a civilian in that hospital, understood? You have no legal rights there until paternity is established. Now go back to your office. There is nothing you can do there but make things worse." Charles hung up the phone. Say nothing. Admit nothing. It was the mantra of his business life. But as he sat there, the image of Evelyn's sweat-streaked, pain-filled face burned into his mind. He wasn't a CAO in a negotiation. He was a man who had just discovered he was a father in the worst way humanly possible. He couldn't leave. He wouldn't. He didn't care what Marcus said. He needed to see her. He needed to know. The blinding white of the operating room light faded, replaced by the dim, merciful grey of a private recovery room. Evelyn Kirby's first sensation was a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from her core. Her second was a profound, hollow emptiness. "He's okay, baby, he's okay," her mother's voice. Evelyn's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. Margaret Kirby was sitting beside the bed, her hand gripping Evelyn's. Margaret's face, usually a roadmap of cheerful wrinkles, was etched with exhaustion and fear. "Where is he?" Evelyn's voice was a dry croak. "They took him to the observation nursery. Just a precaution. He's 7 pounds, 2 ounces, Evie. And he is perfect. A full head of dark hair, just like yours." Tears streamed from the corners of Evelyn's eyes, hot and sudden. "He's alive! I thought—" "Shh, you both are. You both made it." Margaret squeezed her hand, her own voice thick with emotion. The last few hours were a blur of terror. The sudden, crushing pressure in her chest, the inability to breathe, the terrifying diagnosis that had hung over her for 8 months. Peripartum cardiomyopathy, PPCM. A rare, pregnancy-induced heart failure. She'd found out about the PPCM a week after she'd found out about the baby. And she'd found out about the baby 2 days after Charles had signed the divorce papers. It was a cruelty of timing that felt almost biblical. She was standing in the bathroom of the small Fremont apartment she'd rented, the divorce settlement check sitting uncashed on her kitchen counter. She'd been feeling exhausted, chalking it up to the stress of the split. But this was different. This was a deep, cellular fatigue. The 2 pink lines on the test stick had felt like a death sentence, and a miracle all at once. She had almost called him. For one brief, desperate moment, she'd clutched her phone, her thumb hovering over Charles. But what would she have said? "Congratulations, you're free. By the way, I'm pregnant." Then came the doctor's visit. The cardiologist, a kind woman named Dr. Helen Rostova, had sat her down, the EKG results in her hand. "Evelyn, your heart's ejection fraction is dangerously low. It's PPCM. The pregnancy is putting an extreme strain on your heart. We need to discuss your options." "Options?" Evelyn had known what she meant. "Continuing this pregnancy carries a significant risk to you." A very significant risk. Evelyn hadn't hesitated. "I'm keeping him." "Evelyn, this isn't a game. You could die." "Then I'll die," she'd said, her hand instinctively covering her still flat stomach. "He's all I have left." She chose not to tell Charles for a reason that was simple and devastatingly complex. Her dignity. She had seen the way he'd looked at her in those final months, with a mixture of pity and impatience. He saw her as a burden, an obstacle to his new, gleaming life. If she told him about the baby, he would stay. He was a man obsessed with legacy. He would stay, and he would pay for the best doctors. But he would stay out of obligation, not love. He would stay out of guilt. And every time he looked at her, she would see that pity, that resentment. She would be a living, breathing anchor, shackling him to a life he'd already rejected. She would not be his burden. She would not beg for scraps of his affection. This child, her child, deserved to be born from strength, not obligation. So she had told no one but her mother. She'd used the settlement money she'd once planned to use to start her own landscape design business, to pay for the endless, terrifying stream of specialist visits, echocardiograms, and medications. She'd spent her nights alone, her hand on her growing belly, monitoring her own blood pressure, terrified that every flutter was a sign of heart failure, praying she could just hold on long enough to get him here. And she had. She had done it. Alone. He's here, Margaret said, her voice dropping, pulling Evelyn from her memory. Evelyn's heart, the very organ that had betrayed her, gave a painful lurch. "Who?" "Charles. He's in the hallway. He saw you when they brought you in. He's been out there for hours, demanding to see you. A cold, sharp anger sliced through Evelyn's exhaustion. He was here. He had brought his new 20-something girlfriend to this hospital. The audacity was staggering. He had paraded his new life in front of her for months. His picture splashed across Seattle's society pages with her on his arm. And now he dared to show up here, at her most vulnerable moment, to claim a stake in the miracle she had paid for with her own body and soul. "Tell him to go to hell," Evelyn whispered, the words tasting like acid. "Evie, honey, he looks broken." He didn't know. He didn't know because he didn't ask. He didn't know because he was too busy building his empire and screwing his assistant to look back. He didn't deserve to know. Evelyn tried to sit up, a jolt of pain making her gasp. "Easy, easy," Margaret soothed. "Just rest." "No, get the nurse." Evelyn's voice was weak, but her resolve was iron. "Tell the nurse to send him in. And then I want you to leave us alone." "Evelyn, are you sure? You're not strong enough for this." "I was strong enough to carry this baby for 9 months while my heart was failing. I am strong enough to look that bastard in the eye." Evelyn settled back against the pillows, the adrenaline of her fury providing a strange, cold clarity. He wanted to see her. He wanted answers. Fine. She would give them to him. She would show him exactly what he had thrown away. And she would make damn sure he understood that he held no power here. This room, this child, this victory, it was hers, and hers alone. The door to room 308 opened with a quiet, hydraulic hiss. Charles Burden stepped inside, feeling like an intruder. The room was dim, the only light coming from the glowing monitors beside the bed. The air smelled of antiseptic and something metallic. Blood. Evelyn was propped up on a mountain of pillows, her face pale and waxy, dark circles under her eyes that looked like bruises. She was hooked up to an IV and a heart monitor that beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. She looked fragile, but her eyes, when they met his, were as hard as granite. "You came," she said. Her voice was a low, rough rasp. "Evelyn. My God." He took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides, wanting to reach for her, to fix this, to rewind time. "I saw you in the hall. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me?" A small, bitter sound escaped her lips. It wasn't a laugh. It was the sound of air escaping a punctured lung. "Tell you? And interrupt your vacation in Cabo? Or your keynote at the Forbes Summit? I'm sorry, Charles. I must have lost your new assistant's number." The sarcasm was a physical blow. "Evie, that's not fair." "Fair?" She pushed herself up slightly, wincing. "You want to talk about fair? Fair is you signing divorce papers with one hand while you're booking flights with her with the other. Fair is you telling Forbes magazine that your ex-wife didn't share your vision while I was at home vomiting from morning sickness and heart medication. Don't you dare walk in here and talk to me about fair. The baby?" He'd almost forgotten. His eyes darted to the empty plastic bassinet in the corner. "The baby. Is it he?" Evelyn cut in. "His name is Rowan Kirby. And yes, Charles, he's yours. Congratulations. You're a father. He's yours." The words detonated in the quiet room. Charles gripped the aluminum footboard of the bed, his knees weak. A son. He had a son. "Rowan," he repeated, tasting the name. "Evelyn, I swear to God, if I had known—" "You would have done what?" she challenged him, her voice rising with a strength he hadn't thought she possessed. "You would have come back, played the doting husband out of duty, trapped me in a marriage you'd already destroyed? I didn't want your pity, Charles. I didn't want you then, and I sure as hell don't want you now. This isn't about pity," he shot back, his own desperation rising. "This is about my son. You had no right to keep this from me. No right. I had every right," she cried, tears of rage finally spilling over. "I had the right to protect myself and my child from your suffocating, selfish control. You build worlds, Charles. You shape skylines. But you don't get to shape this. This one thing, he is mine." Before he could respond, the door burst open. "Charles, what the hell is going on?" Sienna stood in the doorway, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Her eyes darted from Charles to Evelyn, to the heart monitor, to the empty bassinet. Her earlier performance of a nagging stomach ache was gone, replaced by the raw, jagged edge of betrayal. "Sienna, now is not the time," Charles said, trying to regain control, to manage the unmanageable. "Not the time? I've been paging you for an hour. The doctor said my stomach is fine. It's just stress. No wonder. You're in a maternity ward, with her. Who is she? And what baby?" She pointed a trembling finger at the bassinet. The silence in the room was electric, vibrating with the competing currents of shock, rage, and grief. Evelyn, with a calmness that was more terrifying than any scream, answered for him. "I'm his ex-wife, and that is the bassinet for his son." Sienna looked as if she'd been slapped. Her gaze snapped to Charles. "His son? You have a kid? With her?" The words came out in a choked whisper, then escalated. "You lied to me. All this time. Our plans. You let me talk about our future, and you had this secret?" "Sienna, I swear I didn't know," Charles pleaded, his world collapsing from two different directions. "I just found out. Right now. I'm as shocked as you are." "Shocked?" Sienna let out a high, hysterical laugh. "Oh, that makes it so much better. And what am I, Charles? Huh? Was I just the uncomplicated part of your life while you were playing house over here?" "That's not what this is. You choose," Sienna suddenly snapped, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous ultimatum. She took a step toward him, her eyes glittering. "You choose, Charles. Right here, right now. You walk out of this room with me, and we never speak of this, or her, again. Or you stay here with your baggage." She gestured to Evelyn, her face contorted with disgust. Charles was frozen. He looked at Sienna, the woman who represented the life he'd built, the fast, gleaming, powerful future. Then he looked at Evelyn, the woman he had discarded, who lay broken in a hospital bed, having just fought for her life to deliver his son. The heart monitor beeped. Steady. I need a minute," Charles stammered. "Sienna, just wait outside. We can talk about this." "No," her voice was final. "No more talking, no more managing. Choose." He couldn't. His ambition and his conscience were at war, and he was paralyzed in the no-man's land between them. Sienna watched his indecision, and her expression hardened into something cold and final. "I see," she said quietly. She unclasped the $10,000 Gucci bag he'd bought her last week and threw it at his feet. "Have a nice life, Charles. Send me a check for my things." She turned and was gone, her footsteps echoing down the hall. The silence that descended was heavier, more suffocating than before. Charles was left standing in the wreckage. He had lost his mistress, his carefully crafted image, and any last shred of dignity. He turned back to Evelyn. She hadn't watched Sienna go. Her eyes were closed, her face pale with an exhaustion so deep it looked like death. "You should go," she whispered, not opening her eyes. "You've done enough damage for one day." "Evelyn, get out, Charles." He wanted to argue. He wanted to beg. He wanted to see his son. But the finality in her voice was absolute. He had been dismissed. He turned and walked out of the room, the steady, rhythmic beeping of her heart monitor following him into the hall, sounding like a clock ticking down on a life he no longer recognized. Charles drove for an hour, aimlessly, through the rain-slicked streets of Seattle. The wipers on his Mercedes S-Class kept a frantic, rhythmic beat, matching the panic in his chest. He wasn't just a man in trouble. He was a man in free fall, and he'd just discovered there was no ground beneath him. He'd lost Sienna. That was a logistical and social nightmare. Their breakup would be gossip fodder for the Puget Sound Business Journal for weeks. But that was just noise. The signal in the storm was Evelyn and Rowan. He found himself pulling up to a small, tidy craftsman in Ballard, a neighborhood of old Seattle charm, miles away from the glass and steel world he inhabited. This was where Evelyn had grown up. This was her mother's house. He sat in the car for a long time, the engine ticking in the quiet street. What was he doing here? What could he possibly say? "Sorry I ruined your daughter's life and almost got her killed." He got out of the car. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. He walked up the stone path and knocked on the solid oak door. It was opened almost immediately by Margaret Kirby. She was a small woman, but she stood in the doorway with the unshakable force of a mountain. She wore an apron, and her hands were dusted with flour, but her eyes were cold steel. "You have a hell of a nerve, Charles Burden," she said, her voice quiet, but vibrating with suppressed rage. "Margaret, please, I need to know. Is she okay? The baby? She's resting. No thanks to you. You walk into her hospital room, bring that child with you, and give her an ultimatum? After what she's been through? I didn't give her an ultimatum. Sienna did. I didn't know what was happening." Margaret let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "You still don't know, do you? You think this is just about a baby. You think you can waltz in here, claim paternity, and fix this with a checkbook. I want to help. I want to do what's right." "What's right?" She stepped aside, a grim invitation. "Come in, Charles. Let me show you what right looks like. Let me tell you the story you were too busy to hear." He stepped inside. The house was warm, filled with the smell of baking bread and old wood. It was a home, and the contrast to his sterile penthouse made his stomach clench. Margaret didn't invite him to sit. She stood in the middle of her living room, arms crossed, the grieving warrior defending her child. "Evelyn found out she was pregnant 2 days after you filed for divorce. She found out she had peripartum cardiomyopathy 1 week after that. Do you even know what that is, Charles? Or do you only read financial reports?" He shook his head, feeling small. "It's heart failure, brought on by the pregnancy. The doctors told her, point blank, that carrying this baby to term could kill her. They advised her to terminate." Charles felt the blood drain from his face. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. My God. Yes, my God. And what did she do? She told them to go to hell. She said this baby was the only good thing to come out of the wreckage of her marriage, and she was not going to let him go. Why? Why didn't she tell me? His voice was a bare whisper. I would have helped. The best doctors. Helped! Margaret's eyes blazed. Oh, you would have helped. You would have flown in specialists. You would have put her in a gilded cage and monitored her every breath, and you would have resented her for it. You would have looked at her with that same pity you showed her in the last year of your marriage. You would have stayed out of obligation, and my daughter would rather die alone than live as your burden. The truth of it hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was right. He would have seen it as another complication, another problem to be managed. He wouldn't have seen her. So she did it alone, Margaret continued, her voice breaking for the first time. "I watched my daughter sell her jewelry, the jewelry you gave her, to pay for the specialist Dr. Rostova recommended. I held her hand while she got echocardiograms every single week, praying her ejection fraction hadn't dropped further. I slept on her sofa because she was terrified she would die in her sleep. All while you were being photographed at charity galas with her on your arm. You didn't just abandon your wife, Charles. You abandoned a terrified, sick woman who was fighting for her life and the life of your son." Charles sagged against the chair. The entire fortress of lies he'd built around himself, the justifications, the narrative of the stale marriage, the amicable split, had been leveled. He wasn't a powerful man who'd made a tough choice. He was a coward, a moral, emotional coward. She named him Rowan, he said, the words choked. Yes, after the Rowan tree, the tree of strength, of protection, because that's what he was for her. He was her reason to keep fighting. Margaret finally walked over and sat down, the anger draining out of her, leaving only a profound, weary sadness. "She's upstairs trying to sleep. The baby's in the nursery. You can't see her. You can't see him." "Not yet. Maybe not ever. You need to leave." "Margaret, what can I do?" he pleaded. "Please, there has to be something." She looked at him for a long, hard minute, as if seeing him for the first time. Not as the billionaire mogul, but as a broken man. "You want to do something?" she said, her voice flat. "Go home, Charles, and for the first time in your life, face the man you actually are. Figure out what you're willing to lose to fix this, because you can't buy your way out. You're going to have to bleed for it." The way she did. She stood and opened the front door. He walked out, back into the rain, a man stripped bare. The drive back to his penthouse was a blur. He walked into the vast, glass-walled apartment overlooking Elliott Bay. The view, which usually made him feel like a king, now just looked cold and empty. He went to his bar, poured a glass of Macallan 25, and looked at his reflection in the dark window. Margaret was right. He wasn't just facing a family crisis. He was facing a moral reckoning, and the price of redemption was going to be higher than any deal he'd ever brokered. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in deconstruction. Charles Burden, the man whose entire identity was built on control, lost it. He didn't sleep. He paced the vast, empty expanse of his penthouse, the Seattle skyline mocking him with its silent, indifferent beauty. He replayed every word of his conversation with Margaret. "You're going to have to bleed for it." His first instinct was still that of a CEO. Solve the problem. He called his bank and arranged a wire transfer, a 7-figure gift to a new trust in Evelyn's name. It was an easy, painless solution. He was about to hit confirm when Margaret's voice echoed in his head. "You think you can fix this with a checkbook?" He cancelled the transfer. This wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a salvage operation, and the thing to be salvaged was his own humanity. The first real cost came not from his conscience, but from his ambition. His phone rang. The caller ID read, "Julian Vance, Sienna's father, a venture capitalist whose fund was the primary investor in Charles's new $800 million Bellevue development." "Charles," Julian's voice was arctic, "my daughter just landed in Maui. She's distraught. She told me a rather incredible story about you, your ex-wife, and a secret love child. Julian, it's not what it sounds like. It's complicated," Charles began, the old spin starting up. "Save it," Julian snapped. "I don't care about your sordid little soap opera. What I do care about is my daughter's dignity and my fund's reputation. We don't partner with men who are one tabloid headline away from a moral implosion. Vance Capital is pulling its backing from the Bellevue project. Our lawyers will be in touch." The line went dead. Charles stared at the phone. This was it. The first real drop of blood. This wasn't just losing an investor. This was a torpedo. Losing Vance Capital would trigger a cascade of defaults. It could bankrupt him. This was the price. His empire, or his son. For a moment, he considered calling Julian back, begging, lying, spinning a new narrative. But he was so tired of lying. He was so tired of the image. He did something else. He called Marcus Thorne, his lawyer. "Marcus, Julian Vance just pulled out of the Bellevue project." "What?" "My God, Charles. You have to fix it. Apologize. Send Sienna a car. Whatever it takes." "No," Charles said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's done. I need you to do something else. I want you to find out the name of every specialist Evelyn Kirby has seen in the last 9 months. Every cardiologist, every OB-GYN. I want a list of every single medical bill, and I want you to pay them, anonymously, from a private account." "Charles, that's admitting liability. I don't care what it is. Just do it. And Marcus, I want you to draw up papers for a trust, in the name of Rowan Kirby. I'm seeding it with 50 million. There was a stunned silence. 50. "Charles, are you? And one more thing. Liquidate my shares in the Rainier Square Tower. Cover the Vance Capital withdrawal. We'll take the loss. The project goes forward. Just smaller. I don't care about the penthouse level. Scrap it." He was dismantling his own legacy, tearing down the monuments he'd built to himself. And with every order he gave, every million he sacrificed, the crushing weight in his chest eased, just a fraction. He hung up, took a shower, and put on his oldest, most comfortable clothes, a pair of jeans and a grey cashmere sweater. He drove not to his office, but to a Target. He walked the aisles, feeling like an alien, and filled a cart with diapers, formula, baby wipes, and a soft, plush elephant. Then he drove back to Ballard. He didn't knock. He just left the mountain of supplies on Margaret's front porch. He was about to walk away when the door opened. Margaret stood there, her arms crossed. She looked at the supplies, then at him. Her expression was unreadable. I can't undo what I did," Charles said, his voice raw. "I can't change the last year. But I can. I can be this. I can be the man who brings diapers. I can be the man who pays the bills. I won't bother her. I won't ask for anything. Just let me help. Please." Margaret looked at him, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the genuine desperation. She looked at the diapers. "She doesn't need formula," she said gruffly. "She's breastfeeding." "Oh, right, I didn't know." Margaret sighed, a long, heavy sound. "The yard is a mess, Charles. The gutters are full of leaves. I was supposed to have a guy come out, but it's been a hard few months." Charles looked at the overflowing gutters, the patchy lawn. "I can fix that," he said. "There's a ladder in the shed," she said, and turned to go inside. She paused in the doorway. "She has a follow-up with Dr. Rostova on Tuesday, at Swedish, 10 a.m. Not that you're invited." She closed the door. Charles Burden, the billionaire real estate mogul, walked to the shed, found the ladder, and began to clean the gutters in the rain. It was the first honest day's work he'd done in a decade. Redemption is not a lightning bolt. It is a slow, grinding, uphill walk. For Charles Burden, the next 3 months were the longest mile of his life. He kept his word. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't demand to see his son. He showed up. Every Tuesday, at 10 a.m., He was in the waiting room of the Swedish Heart and Vascular Institute. He'd sit in the corner, reading the Wall Street Journal, his heart hammering in his chest until Evelyn and her mother walked out. He'd just nod at Margaret. Evelyn wouldn't even look at him. But she saw him. He was a fixed point, a silent sentinel. Every Saturday, he was at the Ballard house. He restained the front porch. He weeded the garden beds, the soft soil unfamiliar beneath his manicured fingernails. He assembled a complicated Scandinavian crib that Evelyn had ordered, cursing quietly in the nursery while Margaret held Rowan, the baby's steady, curious gaze fixed on him. He learned his son in stolen glances. He saw that he had Evelyn's dark, thick hair and, he thought, his own stubborn chin. His business life was in triage. The Bellevue project was saved, but at a huge cost. He'd sold his penthouse, his monument to his own ego, and moved into a smaller, serviceable condo in South Lake Union. He was no longer the king of Seattle real estate. He was just a man trying to keep his company afloat while he paid his penance. The miracle that the original story hinted at never came. Miracles, Charles learned, were for fairy tales. Real life was about grit. Evelyn's PPCM didn't magically disappear. It was a long, terrifying battle. Her ejection fraction, which should have been over 50%, was hovering at a dangerous 35%. It was a daily fight, managed with a cocktail of beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, and a brutal low-sodium diet. The true crisis came on a rainy Thursday. Charles was in a budget meeting when his phone lit up. Margaret Kirby. His blood ran cold. He snatched the phone. "Margaret, what's wrong?" She's not good, Charles." Margaret's voice was tight with panic. "She's having trouble breathing. She's dizzy." I called 911. "We're heading to the ER at Swedish." He was out the door before she finished the sentence. "I'm on my way." He beat the ambulance to the hospital. He was standing at the emergency bay doors when they wheeled her in. She was pale, her lips tinged with blue, an oxygen mask fogging with her shallow breaths. Her eyes found his, wide with terror. "Rowan," she gasped. "I'll get him," Charles said, squeezing her hand. "Don't you worry about Rowan. You just fight. You hear me, Evie? You fight." For the next 72 hours, the world shrank to the size of a hospital room. Evelyn was in the cardiac ICU. Her heart was failing to clear the fluid from her lungs. It was critical, and Charles took care of his son. For the first time, he was alone with Rowan. Margaret was a wreck, camped out by Evelyn's bed, and she'd handed him the baby bag with a tearful, "You have to do this." "I can't." He'd taken Rowan back to his condo, and it was terrifying. He fumbled with the diapers. He warmed the bottled breast milk, Margaret had a freezer full, to the wrong temperature, then had to cool it down, all while Rowan screamed, his face a furious, tiny red mask. At 3 a.m., with Rowan still wailing, Charles was on the verge of tears himself. He was exhausted, terrified for Evelyn, and failing at the one thing he'd been asked to do. "Shh, shh, Rowan, come on," he pleaded, rocking the baby against his shoulder. He started to hum, an old, forgotten tune his own father used to hum while working in his wood shop. It was a simple, repetitive melody. Rowan's cries softened. He hiccuped, then rooted against Charles's neck. And, finally, he slept. Charles sank onto the sofa, the tiny warm weight on his chest, and he wept. He wept for Evelyn, for his son, for the years he'd wasted, for the profound, terrifying, unconditional love that was flooding his veins. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't obligation. It was this, he finally understood. The next morning, he brought Rowan to the hospital. Evelyn was stable. The diuretics had worked. She was weak, but the color was back in her face. He stood in the doorway, holding Rowan. Evelyn watched him, her expression unreadable. He was fine, Charles said, his voice hoarse. He doesn't like his milk too warm, and he likes it when you hum. Evelyn's eyes softened. You stayed with him? Of course I did. He walked over, and without asking, gently placed Rowan in the crook of her arm. The baby immediately snuggled against her. Evelyn looked down at her son, then up at Charles. The granite in her eyes was gone. The ice had melted. What was left was something new, something fragile and hesitant. Thank you, Charles, she whispered. He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He didn't need a miracle. He just needed this. He just needed them to be okay. 1 year later, the Ballard house was quiet, save for the sound of a small wooden block tower crashing to the floor, followed by a delighted squeal. Rowan, now 13 months old, was a force of nature. He was walking, or rather, toddling with a drunken, joyful abandon. Charles was on the living room floor, patiently restacking the blocks, his suit and tie long since abandoned for jeans and a worn Seattle Seahawks sweatshirt. Again, Rowan demanded, clapping his hands. Okay, one more time, but this one's going to be a skyscraper, Charles said, carefully balancing a red block on a blue one. Evelyn watched from the armchair, a cup of tea in her hands. She was, by every measure, a different woman. Her hair was cut into a chic, short bob. Colour had returned to her cheeks. Her recent echocardiogram had been a triumph. Her heart function was at 55%. She was officially in remission. She wasn't cured, but she was stable. She was living. She had also, slowly, cautiously, let Charles back into her life. Not as a husband, not even as a partner, but as Rowan's father. He had never failed to show up. He had been there for every doctor's appointment. He had taken Rowan on weekends so Evelyn could rest. He had dismantled his old life with a quiet, ruthless efficiency and started building a new one, a smaller, stronger, more honest one. His company had survived, leaner and less flashy. He was, ironically, more respected for it. He had never asked Evelyn for a single thing. He had never pushed for reconciliation. He simply did the work. He's going to be an engineer. Just like you, Evelyn said, her voice laced with amusement. He's obsessed with how things fit together. Or, Charles countered, placing the last block, he'll be a landscape architect, like his mum. He just likes the demolition part. He grinned at Rowan. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Rowan shrieked with joy and toppled the tower. Later that evening, after Rowan was asleep, Charles and Evelyn sat on the front porch swing he had fixed. The air was cool, carrying the scent of the jasmine Margaret had planted. My PPCM support group is meeting tomorrow, Evelyn said. The one I started online. It's gotten big, Charles. We have women from all over the country. A medical journal wants to interview me. That's incredible, Evie. He looked at her, his admiration genuine. You're helping so many people. You took the worst thing that ever happened and turned it into that. You're amazing. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. The old Charles would have offered to fund it, to scale it up. The new Charles just listened. I've been thinking, she said, her voice soft. It's been hard, doing this on my own. Being a single mum, managing my health. But you haven't been a burden. You've been a support. And I'm tired of being alone. Charles's heart stopped. He turned to look at her, not daring to hope. I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I did, she said, her gaze direct and unflinching. That faith, it's gone. You broke it. He nodded, accepting the truth. I know, but, she continued, I see the man you are now. I see you with Rowan. I see you here. And I think maybe we could build something new. Not what we had. Something different. Something real. Charles felt tears sting his eyes. He reached out, not to grab, but to offer. He laid his hand, palm up, on the swing between them. I am not the man I was, Evelyn, he said, his voice thick, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to be the man you and Rowan deserve. After a long moment, Evelyn slid her hand into his. Her skin was warm. Her grip was strong. Okay, Charles, she whispered. Let's build something new. He brought her hand to his lips, a gesture of reverence. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. It was a foundation, built not on image or power, but on painful truths, hard-won trust, and the resilient, stubborn strength of a family that had refused to stay broken. This wasn't a story about a perfect, magical recovery. It was a story about the hard, daily work of redemption. Charles, Evelyn, and Rowan became a family, not in spite of the betrayal, but because of it. They rebuilt their lives on a new foundation of brutal honesty, mutual respect, and a love that was stronger for having survived the fire. Evelyn's Mums of Heart support group grew into a national foundation, saving lives. And Charles learned that true power wasn't in building skyscrapers, but in showing up every single day for the people you love. What did you think of this story? It was inspired by real-life events, showing that even after the deepest betrayals, dignity, resilience, and true second chances are possible. If this story of strength and redemption touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this one to light. Click the bell so you never miss a single one.